With the copious salvage from their previous fight, Jay and Peregrine had plenty of work ahead of them to dismantle all of the ships. It would certainly keep them busy for the foreseeable future. To allow them to continue making progress in the meantime, it was decided that Peregrine would focus on dismantling the ships, whilst Jay focused on using the materials to expand the Arctis Minor. With Peregrine joining, they would need an extra bedroom however, so they rearranged some of the ship to allow for another bedroom in what used to be the ship's bridge. Back on the ground, the Sea of Sickness was still swelling, with Gardner, Kelsier, Shiro, and Snap all coming down with malaria at once. Although the commander's stance had historically been that bed rest was only to be taken when absolutely medically necessary, he recognised that Freedom's Hold was in a stable enough position to allow those with even minor ailments to take the time to rest and recover properly, and as such he rescinded his old orders to the contrary. With the ground crew in need of medicine, Jay decided to pack up some of the industrial medicine that they had recovered from the damaged ship and fly it down to Freedom's Hold for their use. It would also be a good chance to introduce the ground crew to Peregrine, although it might be a little bit of a confusing situation to see Jay, who had left alone to a spacecraft in orbit, returning to the planet with seemingly a new friend in tow. With multiple members of the crew ill, the Mechanoids thought it would be a wonderful time to launch an attack on Freedom's Hold. This decision seemingly just confirmed the group's suspicion that whatever was controlling the mechs wasn't the smartest, as it had chosen to attack them when Jay and Peregrine had just landed and could serve as reinforcements for the ground crew. A more sensible plan would have been to wait for them to leave, but far be it for the rebels to explain to the Mechanoids how best to kill them. The Mechanoids had opted for a little more variety this time, bringing a Phalanx and a Centurion to tank the hits for them, but a lot of them were still melee bots, which would struggle with the Hold's defences. With the attack beginning, the crew had decided to use it as a case study in their theory that, between the turrets, Mechanoids, and just a handful of the squad, the defences could be held easily enough to allow other members of the squad to continue with their days. Although in this case, continuing with their days mostly meant lying in the hospital or treating to those lying in the hospital. As they had anticipated, despite the presence of slightly more advanced Mechanoids, the squad were able to hold them off, even without the full contingent taking to the defences. This was great news for the productivity of the settlement, but also meant there was likely to be less damaged or missing body parts spread out amongst the group. For most, the malaria was quite effectively treated, but for poor Kelsier with her missing kidney, the treatments were cutting it dangerously close. Thankfully, with the recent stability around the hold, Tercio had managed to find the time to craft a bionic kidney. With Kelsier already passed out in the hospital, he figured he'd knock out two birds with one stone, utilising her lack of consciousness to install the kidney, whilst also increasing her body's ability to fight off the infection by utilising said new kidney. The commander was so determined to improve things for his people that he actually asked Tercio and his apprentice Samini to ensure that they always had at least one bionic arm, kidney, lung, and eye in storage, so that they could replace everyone's missing parts and also be prepared for any future incidents. In order to achieve their next goal of obtaining an entanglement manifold to enable them to achieve faster than light travel, the group would need to start raiding ancient sites to try and find one. The truck had served them well so far, but in the interests of travelling further, faster, and more importantly being able to carry more than 2 squad members, the group began fabricating a new shuttle. This would allow for planetary journeys, but, in extreme scenarios, could also allow the ground crew to head into orbit to help out the flight crew, which given the increase in pirate boarding parties, was a scenario that was worth planning for. Until then, however, work to improve the Arctis Minor's combat effectiveness continued, with Jay adding 2 large railguns in the back. Although there was still a fair chunk of salvage in the way, Jay also began planning out a cavernous new room on the ship. Although this room would hold more coolant tanks, radiators, and standard weapons, the primary purpose of it was to house a large Spinal railgun, the kind that was usually reserved for capital ships. These weapons could be as powerful as the builder wanted them, with their strength being determined by the number of amplifiers built into them. Of course, this meant that lots of power and lots of space were required to make them effective, but this new room should cover off the space requirements, and the power requirements could be dealt with later. Before he could get far into the construction, however, a group of hostile ships approached the Arctis Minor, looking for trouble. The smaller of the ships was quite a common design and not too dangerous, although it did sport a pair of torpedo launchers which could cause trouble if used in conjunction with other torpedo launchers from the other ship, especially as the Arctis Minor only had 2 small laser turrets to shoot them down. Thankfully, the second ship didn't sport any additional torpedo launchers, but it did have a Spinal plasma gun, which could devastate the Arctis Minor if it punched through their shields. The 2 large new railguns managed to land direct hits on the larger ship, causing a fair amount of heat build-up, but not quite enough to bring the shields down. Thankfully, the follow-up from the regular railguns was enough to not only punch through the shields of the enemy ship, but also destroy the head of the Spinal plasma cannon, knocking out one of the most dangerous parts of the attacking ships. The plasma cannon did get a shot off before getting taken out though, and this shot collided with the wreckage that was out with the protection of the Arctis Minor's shields, proving an effective example of the destructive power of Spinal weapons. With so much debris in the area around the Arctis Minor, it wasn't safe for it to boot up its engines, allowing the attacking ships to get close enough to use their multiple laser turrets, which built incredible heat in the Arctis Minor's shields, until they were forced down, allowing the attackers to destroy one of the ship's engines and a hull section at the rear. Luckily for Jay and Peregrine, these seemed to be parting shots, as the 2 ships decided better of the fight and beat a hasty retreat, leaving the Arctis Minor to tend to its wounds. Following a few days without incident, the ground crew report spotting a couple of odd creatures in the area. Upon consulting local experts via the comms console, Tavi is horrified to learn that they are what's known as Swarmlings, horrible little creatures that plant their larvae on creatures they attack, leaving them to hatch once the creature is dead. Much to the whole squad's joy, they never had to deal with the gruesome little freaks up close, as one of the Mechanoid clusters they'd left active near the hold seemed equally unenthusiastic about the presence of the Swarmlings and quickly obliterated them. Jay had put a pause on the new room of the ship in order to rebuild the hull and the engine that had been damaged in the last attack. Thankfully, they had enough resources spare to rebuild the engine, which needed a lot of advanced components. They also still had one functional engine to allow them to escape the field of space debris they drifted into before a chunk of detritus could rip Jay's head from his body. With the engine soon finished, and the debris cleared with the help of the attacking ships, Jay was soon able to plan out the remainder of the new room on the ship, and it would be monstrous indeed, taking full advantage of the ship's current shield size. With the ground crew's new shuttle ready, Shiro, Vin, Samini and Weaver all headed out to investigate some nearby ancient ruins, in the hopes of unearthing an entanglement manifold. Unsure what dangers awaited them, they picked a landing spot a short distance from the entrance to the facility, and took a cautious approach, which quickly proved to be sensible. The moment they walked into the first room of the facility, a swarm of insectoids began burrowing up from below them. Eager not to fight them in the cramped confines of the building, where the insectoids would have the advantage, the group quickly retreated to a defensive line back near the shuttle, using some ancient barbed wire fences to block the oncoming insectoids. In preparation for this mission, the group had all come equipped with at least one close combat weapon each, as they knew they would be in cramped quarters if danger were present. This allowed them to make quick work of the insectoids, with only Shiro taking some minor damage, although her plasteel axe got wetted with some insectoid blood too. With the insectoids dealt with, they returned to the structure and started clearing it room by room, extracting a number of useful materials from hermetic storage crates, but sadly no entanglement manifolds just yet. Finding some packaged survival meals, they decided to take a short break to eat and rest up, but the facility had other ideas. An unstable fuel node in one of the rooms lost its remaining stability, and exploded in a plume of fire, setting the whole facility ablaze. Concerned that the blaze may engulf any entanglement manifolds hidden in the complex, Vin re-entered the compound to continue searching, but found a little more than she bargained for. Setting off another unstable fuel node, she tried to escape to the adjoining room, only to awaken two dormant mechanoids who were none too happy to see her. With the superheated room behind her and two mechanoids in front, Vin had nowhere to go and soon went down. Sammy and Weaver heard her screams and rushed in, but they had to contend with the mechanoids first. Weaver took a number of hits from the dagger snout before Sammy was able to draw its attention, allowing Weaver to fire upon it from behind her while Sammy herself wailed on it with her steel hatchet. Although both Sammy and Weaver took a beating, they managed to take out the dagger snout, and Shiro arrived just in time to help them dismantle the Scorcher. Between the pain of her numerous injuries and the heat from the inferno, Sammy went down before they could retreat. Weaver grabbed her and began dragging her outside and away from the fire, whilst Shiro ventured further into the maze of superheated rooms to find Vin. Thankfully, Shiro was able to locate Vin and extract her to the safer temperatures outside without further incident. Once outside, they began to tend to their wounds, with Weaver even venturing back into the inferno once more to collect some medicine they had found earlier to help tend to them. Thankfully, it seemed as though they were all going to be okay, although likely in a lot of pain for the foreseeable future. And, of course, tending to their wounds in the dirt outside inevitably led to some infections. After a while, one of the external walls burnt down, releasing the superheated air from the complex and allowing Shiro to dash back inside to check out the remaining rooms. They wanted to get back to Freedom's Hold as quick as they could to tend to their wounds in the clean hospital, but they had come here with a goal, and it would be foolish not to check the last two rooms. Entering one of the final rooms, however, Shiro accidentally activated a dormant Tesseron. She tried to engage it with her axe, knowing that she had the upper hand in melee combat, but the Mechanoid kept retreating and trying to use its laser weapon, and in her injured state, she just couldn't keep up with it. Instead, she chose to lead it back to the group, where Vin tried to step in to help. Unfortunately, she wasn't in time to prevent Shiro from getting lit on fire by the laser cannon. With Shiro rolling around outside in the rain, trying to douse the fire, Vin, entirely fed up with the debacle that this originally simple mission had become, took out her frustrations on the Tesseron and ripped it apart with her bare hands. As soon as it was down, they dragged their injured and their valuables back to the shuttle and headed straight home. Given that they had thought this would be a simple, routine mission, it had somewhat shaken their confidence to have so much difficulty carrying it out. With Shiro's burns becoming infected, both Shiro and Sammy were ordered on bed rest upon return. This seemed like the perfect time to give them some bionic replacements, as they were already out of the action for a bit. As such, Tercel fitted Sammy with a new lung to replace her missing one, whilst his medical intern, Vin, took on the dangerous task of replacing Shiro's mangled eye with a bionic one. Thankfully, working side by side, they were both able to complete the operations without incident, and the whole crew felt more confident, knowing that they could also rely on Vin to take care of their medical needs, instead of solely relying on Tercel. With Freedom's Hold growing ever larger and the squad being so busy with their normal duties, some of the chores were falling by the wayside, with cleaning especially becoming an issue, as the hold was slowly becoming covered in a layer of filth. The squad were suffering from their own success in other areas too, with a whole harvest of food being left out in the fields as their stockpile was already overflowing. To remedy this, Brom suggested that they build an auxiliary food storage building. This would stop the current harvest from going to waste, and they could utilise the food in there as trading resources, as they clearly didn't need all that they had stockpiled. She suggested building the new storage facility right next to the fields, so that they could freeze the food as soon as it was ready, helping to keep it fresh. Although, with the abundance of food, Kelso suggested that she start cooking up some more complex meals for the squad. It would use up more of their supplies per meal, but would be tastier and make the team happier, and they weren't exactly short on the supplies. Back in orbit, the diligent work of the flight crew had seen the new room almost complete. The only outstanding section was the focusing array for the Spinal gun. This wouldn't do anything until they connected up some amplifiers and a capacitor, however the focusing array would also form one wall of the room, so it was an essential component of ensuring that the hull was airtight. While the ground crew were putting the finishing touches on the new section of Freedom's Hold, a group of hostiles approached, looking to lay siege to the settlement. Thanks to the sieges that they'd survived before, the squad had managed to get their hands on some mortars of their own though, and Tavi hopped on one to start launching mortars towards their siege camp. Mortars weren't exactly super accurate however, and they may be able to endure quite a few before they gave up their position and charged their defences. So to speed things up, the commander grabbed his Mechanoids and walked them out to the outskirts of their siege encampment, to begin picking them off with their long-ranged weapons. Tavi landed one great hit with the mortar before the commander told him to go rest. His mood was sour enough at the best of times without forcing him to stay up all night. The Mechanoids get a little closer to get better shots, but in turn end up taking a few shots from the hostiles, including a rocket straight to the centre of the group. This ends up turning into a protracted firefight between the Mechanoids and the hostiles, and unfortunately, this time, the hostiles come out on top. For the time being, the ground crew will need to endure the bombardment, but Vin grabs her sniper rifle and heads out of the settlement to try and finish the job that the Mechanoids had started. As Vin began taking her shots, another pirate ship tried to hail the Arctis Minor. Given how ineffective his attempts at parley had been so far, Jay simply ignored the comms for now. The commander was keeping him updated about the attack on the ground, and he wanted himself and Peregrine to be available to fly down and help out, if need be, something they couldn't do if they ended up in a fight in orbit. Thankfully, after a few more well-placed shots from Vin, the sieging hostiles gave up their position and decided to charge the defences of the hold. Vin pulled back to the defences and, along with only the young defenders, took positions to defend the hold. Just as they'd planned, once the hostiles attacked the defences, they were easy to destroy, and the squad turned their assault into a retreat in no time. With confirmation from the commander that all was well on the ground, Jay finally responded to the pirates' hails, with the entirely anticipated outcome. Thankfully, it was just a small pirate ship, a model they'd dealt with plenty of times before. With their new large railguns taking down the enemy shields immediately, they thought they would have an easy time of it. However, it seemed that, as they tried to move in to launch a volley from their guns, only one of the Arctis Minor's two engines was firing, meaning they couldn't outpace the pirate ship to close the distance. Clearly something hadn't been calibrated correctly when they rebuilt the engine after the last attack, but no matter. They just have to rely on the two large railguns to dismantle the pirates from a distance for now. For some reason that Jay couldn't quite fathom, the pirate ship decided to close the distance between themselves and the Arctis Minor, allowing the Arctis Minor to fire its full contingent of railguns, speeding up the demise of the pirate ship. Following the fight, Jay decided to build out the Arctis Minor's bridge a little, adding a tactical console and a science console. The tactical console would allow Peregrine to man the guns during the fights, increasing their accuracy, whilst the science console would allow them to spend their spare time scanning the orbital landscape for any valuable asteroids or wreckages. They kept an eye on the enemy wreckage, and once it seemed that the remaining pirates had floated away from the main body of the wreckage, they used the salvage bay's tractor beam to pull the wreckage to them, so that they could begin dismantling it and using it to build out the new room of the Arctis Minor. With the new resources, they were soon able to complete the focusing array of the Spinal cannon, and it came time for Jay to decide how many amplifiers to include on the gun. The more they had, the more energy would be required to fire it, and in the short term, the more materials would be required to complete construction. They had plenty of space, but Jay opted for 12 amplifiers to begin with. It should make a fairly powerful cannon, and if they decided to add more later, they could. But this way they would have it online sooner, and could gauge its effectiveness and go from there. Back at Freedom's Hold, given the success of the new food storage facility as well as the congestion of the workshop, Brom suggested that they also build a new general storage facility. She proposed building this one closer to the new shuttle bays and the vehicle garage, to allow for easier and faster loading and unloading of cargo from shuttles and other vehicles. The local Mechanoids were finally starting to develop a slight understanding of combat, as they send in another group, this time including a termite Mechanoid armed with a thump cannon, a cannon which excels at bringing down structures. The termite uses this new cannon to blow a hole in the north side of Freedom's Hold's defensive wall, allowing the others to filter in and bypass the defences completely. Thankfully, the Mechanoids hadn't learned too much about combat, and instead of the usual flood of melee Mechanoids, they'd sent only one melee Mechanoid, and a bunch of Mechanoids that excel at ranged combat. The one time they'd actually managed to close the distance with the squad. The squad were in position and waiting when the wall fell, allowing them to turn the whole area into a shooting gallery, where their shorter range weapons could work to great advantage, allowing them to quickly take out all of the Mechanoids with only minimal structure damage and a few minor injuries. Given the group struggled to get around to the more basic tasks of the settlement, such as hauling things and cleaning, the commander decided to put his new bandwidth to use and start building a clean sweeper Mechanoid to clean up around the place. He also began the longer task of gestating a number of additional lancers, to allow the squad greater long distance damage potential. It wasn't long before the little clean sweeper was working away, starting with, much to everyone's joy, the kitchen, before moving on to clean the rest of the settlement. With the power situation at Freedom's Hold getting tenuous once more, they decided to invest in a third geothermal generator to complement the solar farm. The next best spot for a geothermal generator was just outside the walls, next to the toxic waste storage and the burn pit. It took a bit of reorganising, but they were eventually able to plan out the infrastructure that would be required to allow them to build and properly protect the generator. Jay and Peregrine receive a warning from the ship that another hostile ship has begun locking weapons on them. Jay is initially excited, as he wants to get more parts to help him finish the Spinal gun, but upon scanning the other ship, their butts clench a little. It's no basic pirate ship, this thing is quite a beast, sporting a large number of laser turrets and a high heat capacity. With their new engines still refusing to fire, they realise the issue. They forgot to fuel it. Despite rushing to fuel it, they're unable to outrun the enemy ship and will have to face it head on. The enemy ship's lasers cause a tremendous amount of heat buildup in the Arctis Minor shields, worrying the flight crew greatly. They take a guess at where the other ship's bridge is likely to be and unleash their full arsenal. This time, they get lucky. The bridge of the enemy ship is exposed at the front of the ship, and the Arctis Minor's first volley opens up the pathway. One more volley is all that's required to take out the control console and reduce the enemy ship to a useless floating husk. It's a lucky escape for the Arctis Minor. Unfortunately for Jay, the remnants of the enemy ship are too large to tractor beam over to them, but given the number of hostiles still on board, it would likely be a poor idea to drag them within shooting distance anyways. They would have to leave this wreckage for gravity to deal with. Ever eager to give the squad new challenges, the planet decides to send a wave of blood shrimp at the colony in an attempt to wreak havoc. The planet has underestimated the squad, however, as, seeing the opportunity to have a week's worth of seafood, the group lure them into the defences and quickly turn them to mush. Seeing that its blood shrimp plan has backfired, the planet instead resorts to its old tricks of supplying sickness and strikes down a number of the crew with the plague. Most of the crew handle it easily, with Tercio, Kelsier, Vin and Weaver soon gaining the upper hand on their infection, with the help of good medicine and plenty of bed rest. Snap, on the other hand, with her still missing kidney, is struggling to fight it off, despite the best efforts of the squad's medics. In an effort to help Snap, Brahma and Tercio quickly get together and try to plan out an expansion to the hospital that may allow them to offer greater care and more advanced diagnostic tools. As they finish up the new Vital Center, Snap is balanced on a knife's edge, not quite able to get ahead of the illness, but fighting hard. In a desperate attempt to get better quality medicine to try and improve her chances, The commander loads up a shuttle and heads out to trade with the more advanced factions on the planet. But as it stands, they have no interest in trading with the rebels. In the end, he redirects his efforts to their friendly neighbours, but unfortunately they only have industrial medicine, which doesn't help nearly as much as a batch of Glitterworld medicine would. The commander returns home heavy with regret. Without Glitterworld medicine, it would be up to the fates whether Snap pulled through or not. Alas, despite the best efforts of the whole squad combined, Snap is unable to overcome the plague and succumbs to it in the comfort of Freedom Hold's hospital. Mourning the death of her wife, Shiro suggests they find a nice place to bury Snap near Freedom's Hold, to honour her memory properly. Recognising that with the path they've chosen, Snap is the first, but likely not the last member of their group they'll lose, the commander instructs Brom to build a burial grove, where they can grieve and remember their fallen comrades. Brom elects to build this to the south of the settlement. As a native of the planet, Snap had told the crew tales of the importance and reverence that the people of this planet gave to the anima trees. It felt right that Snap should be buried close to one. With the plot dug, the group all gathered together to say their final farewells to Snap. Eager to make Snap's death mean something, the group press on with their goals. The young combat squad set off in a shuttle to search a new set of ruins for any signs of an entanglement manifold. As they take off, they fly over a sea of boom rats heading towards the settlement, but the commander contacts them to tell them not to worry and keep on their journey. The rest of the squad can handle the boom rats. Given the dangers they encountered at the last set of ruins, the group elect to not go in through the front door, in case it's a trap, and instead they begin just blasting a hole through the side of the wall. Sweeping around the facility, it seems like they may be in the right sort of place, as there are a number of old, high-tech facilities laying around. As they're exploring the facility, their ship sensors warn them of an approaching heat signature. As it appears to only be a single person with little to no armour, the group send out Weaver to intercept, while the others continue searching. Unfortunately for Weaver, the attacker is a Neanderthal, which makes it difficult for him to take them down, and he's unable to bring them down before they get within melee distance of him. Using their enhanced strength, they soon knock Weaver on his ass, before grabbing him and attempting to drag him out the area. Thankfully, he had managed to warn the others before he went down, and they managed to get back outside just in time to shoot his would-be kidnapper out from under him. Vin stayed behind to tend to Weaver, while Samine and Shiro ventured back in to clear out the rest of the facility. Unfortunately, there was no sign of an entanglement manifold. They attempted to take apart one of the other machines to see if there was anything valuable to be salvaged, but with almost nothing to be gained from it, they decided to pack up and head back home. With the failure of the last large ship to take out the Arctis Minor, it seemed that the powers that be wanted to try the opposite tactic, and sent a contingent of smaller ships to attack this time. Although one of the ships was unshielded, Jay suggested aiming for another of the ships first. He knew the model well from previous encounters, so was aware of the location of its control console, so he was confident he could take it out quick. An important factor given how many torpedo launchers they were staring down the barrel of. His experience does pay off though, as with just 2 quick volleys they're able to take out the ship, reducing the incoming damage their shields will need to contend with. With that ship out of the picture, they next turn their attention to the one armed with a mixture of rail and plasma guns. The other 2 rely heavily on torpedoes, which can be handled at least in part by the laser turrets. There was no stopping the rail or plasma shots though, so taking them out first would minimise the damage taken. Jay lowers the shields for just a moment to try and vent some of their heat, but in that single moment a shot from the enemy ship weaves its way through and takes out one of the Arctis Minor's engines. With the enemy closing the distance, they manage to fire more of their weapons, bringing down the Arctis Minor's shields and opening up the hull to direct damage, which results in the remaining engine also being obliterated. Jay notes that if they survive this, they're going to need greater protection for the engines in the future. With the shields down, the enemy fleet launches boarding parties towards the Arctis Minor. It seems as though they chose their least favourite crew members to be the boarding party, however, as soon as the Arctis Minor takes out the second ship, the remaining two turn tail and flee, abandoning their raiding party crewmates to their fate. That fate being a swift death at the hands of Peregrine and Jay. With the battle over, they use the salvage bay to retrieve the wreckages of the two ships they destroyed and set to work dismantling them in order to rebuild their engines and hopefully finish their Spinal cannon. Although they perhaps should have focused on the engines first, Jay's excitement got the better of him and he quickly finished up construction of the Spinal railgun. Now he just needed an excuse to test it. Thankfully, with the salvage from the other two ships, they had plenty of materials to do both, including adding a new engine to the rear of the new hull section to increase their engine power. Jay didn't have to wait long to test out the new cannon. A large pirate ship approached the Arctis Minor at speed, looking to cause trouble, clearly assuming the Arctis Minor had been weakened by the encounter just the previous day. Jay gleefully introduced the pirates to his new rail cannon, which immediately tore through their shields, destroying their own small Spinal laser cannon. Losing this removed a large portion of the pirates' firepower, whilst also creating a cavernous hole in their hull. Although it's usually an unsatisfying conclusion to a fight as it yields no resources for them, the pirates immediately run, and Jay can't help but feel a little satisfied. The new cannon has exactly the effect he was hoping for. With the addition of Gardner's extra Mechanoids, including a second hauling bot he made to keep signal company, their waste pack atomizer was no longer able to keep pace with the toxic waste packs the Mechanoids were creating. Deciding that he'd need to supplement it with a second atomizer, Gardner provoked yet another Apocryton so that they could destroy it and use its chip. The crew had been here before, however, and knew how to handle this fight. This Apocryton brought a mixture of melee scythers, short-ranged Militors, and laser-wielding Tesserons to back it up. Unfortunately for it, the scythers and Militors were rendered useless by the settlement's defences, which were designed to keep attackers at a distance. And the Tesserons decided to focus on the commander's Mechanoids. But it turns out the weaponry designed to cause fires was ineffective against Mechanoids. So for the most part, the crew were able to just keep up a constant stream of bullets, completely decimating each Mechanoid until the Apocryton was no longer able to resurrect them, and it too fell. With the new Spinal cannon not reaching as far back in the new hull space as Jay had initially thought, he had plenty of spare room and materials, which he decided to put towards adding 2 more large coolant tanks to greatly increase the ship's heat capacity, a new large heatsink to help vent said heat, and a whole line of new laser turrets. Given that many of the ships that attacked them were relying heavily on torpedo attacks to hit from a distance, and that a number of them were now sending boarding parties, he figured that having a few extra point defense turrets would prove invaluable, as the 2 they currently had were struggling to shoot down a helpful number of projectiles. As well as that, if any attackers did get close enough to use the lasers offensively, the Arctis Minor would be able to quickly take down enemy shields, allowing their railguns to wreak havoc on the hull. With the abundance of steel they had, and the squishiness of the ship's parts made evident, we're looking at U engines, Jay also chose to begin a program of adding heavy steel cladding to the exterior of the ship. He'd previously attached a few sparse sections of armour plating, but this time he was determined to protect as much of the ship as possible, so drew up plans to heavily clad the outer sections. He also extended what used to be the portside connecting room to turn it into a storage area, as they were starting to run out of spots to store all of the materials they were getting from disassembling the ships. With the first segment of cladding protecting the new hull section and the Spinal cannon, Jay forged ahead with protecting the rest of the portside. With Freedom's Hold seeing a few days of relative quiet, they'd managed to produce more bionics, allowing both Brom and Kelsier's missing hands to be replaced by bionic arms. Jay was beginning to feel like he had a good idea of the Arctis Minor's final form, and as such was confident adding some armoured cladding to the starboard side too, in areas where he didn't expect the ship to expand much further. With the ship coming along nicely, the ground crew needed to do their part to see the project through, so headed off to another set of ancient ruins they'd heard rumours of. These ruins seemed to be embedded in the mountain, so they decided to land at the door, on alert for any potential traps or dangers. Entering the first room, they find a lot of ancient detritus, but nothing of interest. Pushing onto the main chamber of the ruins, they don't spot much of interest there either, but there are a number of other doors leading to other rooms. Forcing open one of the other doors, they are greeted by the glint of success, as the entanglement manifold tucked away in a corner of the room reveals itself to them. Eager to claim success, but conscious that there might be more of value in here, they begin searching another room. However, as they begin to pry open the next door, they're warned of another approaching attacker. Given what happened to poor Weaver last time, all four of the group head outside this time, to make quick work of the attacker. Determined to do their due diligence, the group head back inside to check out the final room, when yet another attacker approaches. They aren't able to get back outside before the attacker arrives, but thankfully the attacker ignores the shuttle in favour of walking straight into the group's shooting gallery. With their prize in tow, the group head home victorious. Before they can fly their prize to the Arctis Minor, however, a monster of a ship locks onto the Arctis Minor. The hostile ship is designed to intimidate, but Jay's an experienced pilot now, and he knows how to evaluate a threat. The ship does have quite a number of weapons, along with a decent heat capacity. But with his new armour cladding and the Spinal rail cannon, Jay likes his chances of making away with a few hundred tons of salvage. The first volley from the Arctis Minor's railguns overwhelms the ship's shields, and begins chipping away at sections of its hull. The attackers quickly board a large shuttle and attempt to make their way over to the Arctis Minor. Realising that the Arctis Minor has the advantage at a distance, the hostiles try to close the distance. But with its 3 new engines, the Arctis Minor can accelerate faster and is able to keep the attackers at a distance where only torpedoes or railguns would be effective. With the new array of laser turrets, the Arctis Minor is able to damage the hull of the enemy ship before it can approach, forcing it to retreat to save its crew. They aren't quite fast enough though, and the shuttle and its crew are scattered to the void. 2 smaller single-occupant shuttles make it past the lasers to dock next to the Arctis Minor, but the flight crew are more interested in the ship battle than dealing with them for the time being. With the battle drawing out and the Spinal cannon gobbling up their energy, they overload the reactor slightly, to increase its power output at the cost of using their fuel at a faster rate. Although the enemy's heat capacity is being reduced slightly as more and more of their coolant tanks are destroyed, their shield can still turn away most of the Arctis Minor shots, aside from those from the Spinal cannon. Jay redirects power from all the other guns to the Spinal cannon, allowing it to keep firing regularly at the cost of shutting off the other guns. The hostile ship decides better of the fight and tries to flee, but the Arctis Minor had been controlling the distance of the engagement from the start, and seeing that they'd lost most of their shields and firepower, Jay redirected the cannon to target the ship's engines to ensure they couldn't run. He was determined to get his hands on the remains of that ship. Over the course of the next few volleys, Jay shaves off more and more of the enemy ship, making sure to pull off chunks small enough for the salvage bay to handle. Pretty soon, their last engine is obliterated, and they can't do anything but wait for the Arctis Minor to finish its work. During the fight, the flight crew had overloaded their reactors even further, in order to squeeze as much power out as they could, to ensure the cannon could take out the enemy engines before the Arctis Minor could run out of fuel. Doing so had caused an immense buildup of heat, and a rupture of the fuel tanks, leaking radioactive goo all over the generator room. Now that the enemy couldn't run, however, they reduced the output, put out the fire, and began cleaning up the goo. Before long, they dealt the final blow, and all that remained was to take care of the two raiders who had flown over and proceeded to panic and achieve nothing. Jay and Peregrine took to space with the powerful charged weaponry they'd salvaged from previous hostile ships, and began firing upon them. It seemed that the attacking duo's panic had never quite ended, however, as they sat outside of the Arctis Minor shields attempting to fire upon Jay and Peregrine. But just as it kept out enemy torpedoes, the ship's shield also stopped small arms fire from outside. Granted, all they'd have to do to circumvent this is traverse the few meters into the shield's radius, but seemingly oblivious to this fact, they remained outside, firing fruitlessly at the shield while Jay and Peregrine destroyed them. Although a lot of the ship had simply been disintegrated during the fight, a few good chunks had simply separated from the main body, and Jay dragged these in to dismantle them. With the Arctis Minor already proving to be a force to be reckoned with, and the entanglement manifold secured, the rebels would soon be able to reveal themselves to the Empire in explosive fashion. Hey guys, Tuna here, just slipping in at the end to say thank you for watching. This one ended up being a bit longer than my usual ones. I just got a bit engrossed in playing and got a lot more footage than I expected, but hopefully y'all enjoyed it. The next episode is likely to be the finale of this series, unless something goes very, very wrong. So make sure you're subscribed to get a notification when that comes out, and until then, I hope life treats you very well. Goodbye!